Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today, and good afternoon to those on the Eastern Coast as well. I'm Nicholas Reid from Reid Corporate, and it's my pleasure on behalf of Stavely Minerals to welcome you to this special investor webinar and shareholder webinar. Before I introduce Stavely's Executive Chairman and Managing Director, Chris Cairns, a few brief words of introduction. Stavely listed on the ASX back in 2014, and over the past 8 years, has been a pioneer of exploration and discovery in Western Victoria's Stavely volcanic belt. Stavely's mission is to unlock the potential of this vast and underexplored district as a major new copper-gold province, one that is set to play a pivotal role in delivering the copper which we all know will be required for the impending global energy transformation. Following a 2-year intensive resource drill out, Stavely has recently delivered an initial mineral resource estimate for its exciting Cayley Lode discovery at the heart of its Stavely Copper-Gold Project. It is also now working on scoping and development studies and the next phase of exploration aimed at growing what appears to be a very large mineral system at the Cayley Lode and the wider Thursday's Gossam prospect. Stavely recently announced an institutional capital raising and share purchase plan to underpin this next phase of activity. Before handing over to Chris to step us through the presentation, just a brief reminder to everyone listening to please use the Q&A tab on your webinar browser to log any questions that you would like me to put to Chris at the conclusion of his presentation. Also, a reminder that a recording of this webinar will be available shortly after its completion and will be emailed to all attendees and posted on YouTube and the company's website later today. With those formalities concluded, I'd now like to introduce Chris Cairns to run us through the latest on the Stavely story. Chris, good morning, welcome, and please go ahead.
Thank you, Nicholas. It's great to be here and great to be able to communicate with our shareholders. Excuse me, let me just get a full screen. There we go. Right, the normal disclaimer, this will be on our website for anyone who wants to go through it again. So as Nicholas mentioned, we were a first mover in Western Victoria. We took up a position there in 2013 privately and then brought it to market in an IPO in 2014. We had spent 5 years drilling for a deep porphyry and then one of our consultants said, well, you're only a junior company, you don't have deepest pockets, so why don't you look for this high-grade, structurally controlled mineralization that you'd identified in your deeper drilling, but try and find that close to surface. The result was hole 50 that in September 2019 discovered the Cayley Lode. Since then, also as Nicholas mentioned, we've spent the past couple of years drilling it out. It's been a slow drill out because it's all been diamond drilling. There's shallow saline water in that district and it is agricultural land. So we had to do it with diamond because we couldn't afford to get the saline groundwater on surface. We had to contain all our fluids. But the resource now has come out a couple of weeks ago, unfortunately announced on the worst day in the market in the past 10 years. I think a number of people thought that the resource wasn't very good because the share price got sold down as a consequence, but that's not the case. It was really a terrible day in the market. The resource is good, it's solid. As expected from my perspective, the grade is pretty much spot on my expectation. The tonnage, if anything, is probably a couple of million tons larger than what I expected. So the almost 10 million tons, 1.23% copper, 0.23 gold and a bit of silver, with total resources, including the chalcocite blanket and the Carroll's VMS up near Ararat, 28.3 million tons at 0.75% copper and 0.1 grams gold, containing over 200,000 tons of copper, 100,000 ounces of gold, and in excess of 3.2 million ounces of silver. It is, as we've been saying for a long time, a different style of mineralization. It's a magma Arizona or a Butte Montana copper lode style system. Both of these systems driven by porphyries in the vicinity. So we maintain that this system is also driven by a porphyry that we have yet to see. But we have a dominant position in the area and there are multiple discovery opportunities in our large 10-year package. Having said that, the market is pretty awful. We got caught when we put out the resource. It was the worst day in the market in 10 years. we've since been punished with a capital raising that we had to do, unfortunately, at an eye-watering 15 cents, which really values the company at less than $15 million. And it really is a bit of a kick in the guts in terms of the quality of this asset. And I don't think it's a fair reflection of what we've derived in the resource and what the potential is exploration-wise. So the assets that we have are at Stavely, our main focus, and then up on the right-hand side of this figure, the Ararat project. It has the little Carroll's VMS. But our focus originally was at Thursday's Gossan for Acadia-style porphyry, and we were looking at drilling some deeper holes to find that porphyry originally. In this figure, the porphyry is shown as the sort of beige hatch, and the chalcocite blanket is the red outline on those margins on that north-south structure and on the northwest structure there in the black dashed lines. That northwest structure is the one that hosts the Cayley Lode. It's got that 9.3 million tons at just over 1% copper and 1/4 grams gold. The VMS at Carroll's is 1 million tons. It's a bit sweeter at 2.2% copper and almost 1/2 gram gold, but a big inventory of metal in both of those projects. The discovery hole, hole 50, 32 meters at 6% copper and 1 gram gold from very shallow 62 meters depth. Very high tenor sulfides, bornite and chalcocite, which give us those very high grades, subintervals of 2 meters at 40%. So very sweet. Subsequently, we've gone through and drilled it out. This magnetic image shows the very magnetic ultramafic, and it's that contact, that black dash line where the Cayley Lode resides, and that's been well drilled out at a 40 by 40 basis, which gives us a very large proportion of indicated high confidence resources, 62% in the total, but that does include 1.7 million tons of all inferred in the underground. So it's actually quite a lot higher standard in the near shallow resource. In the long section, we see that those large magenta bubbles are greater than 100 copper percent equivalent meters, which you may as well think of as 50 meters by 2% copper in excess of that. And so it's got a very distinct southerly plunge. The little yellow captions there sort of showing peripheral base metal mineralization, which is very typical of these types of systems. But the plunge into some of our more recent drilling at depth, about 400 meter underneath that lower angle structure, holes 173, which is the magenta circle at the end of the gray arrow, and holes 182, some very nice grades that I'll go on with to show. But just to illustrate that the mineralization is amenable to both open pit and underground, this hole 87, it was a nice broad intercept of 87 meters at 1.74% copper and 1/2 gram gold, within which we see very consistent basal contact mineralization, in this instance 9 meters at 4.1% copper and almost 2 grams gold. So that narrower, higher grade interval is very much amenable to underground development. And within this intercept, another intercept coherent high grade zone up further in the hole, 24 meters at 4.2% copper and 1/4 grams gold. So amenable to both open pit and underground. Some of the deeper drilling that I referred to, this is hole 182. 2 intercepts in this hole. The hanging wall intercept getting a little bit flatter as we go deeper, 10.4 meters at over 4% copper and 3 grams gold, with a really sweet subinterval of almost 5 meters at almost 7% copper and 6.5 grams gold. We need some further drilling in there to confirm that those higher grade gold intercepts are going to continue in this area, but it's not surprising to us in that we're getting more into the bornite type zone. And that little figure of showing the photo of the rock there is absolutely beautiful from a geologist perspective. It's very nice. So the resources, where are we? As mentioned, overall the resource is 9.3 million tons at 1.23% copper and 0.23 grams gold. 62% of it in the indicated. That was our intent, that we would have a majority of those resources in the indicated category. But the story is actually quite a bit bigger than that. The resources within an open pit shell optimized at $6 a pound. It's currently below $4 a pound. At the time, it was $4.50 when we ran this resource. But I'm a copper bull, and my belief is that copper is going to go to $10 a pound. So I don't think this is unrealistic. The pit is large, 1.5 kilometers long, 700 meters wide, and 300 meters deep, and mineralization remaining open down plunge and down dip. But within the open pit, the resources are, again, a greater proportion of indicated, at almost 75% indicated within the Cayley Lode. When we look at the chalcocite blanket, we've gone conservative here. So all of the green material outside of the open pit is not classified as resources, only that material that falls in the open pit. So it's come down from about 28 million tons down to 18 million tons, but a very large proportion of that now on the higher confidence indicated resources just in that open pit. And the reason for that is that many of our diamond drill holes that were testing the Cayley Lode went through the chalcocite blanket in the upper portion of those holes. So it's a high confidence resource now. The in-pit resources with chalcocite blanket and Cayley Lode is a very large 26 million tons at 0.62% copper and 0.1 grams gold, 80% of it again in that indicated category, containing 155,000 tons of copper and 76,000 ounces of gold. The underground resource, it's all inferred. It's hanging off a few holes, and we need to do some more work on this, but there is some good grade down there. It's at a 1% lower cutoff, it's 1.8% copper and 0.2 grams gold, but there are higher grade zones. You can see in the figure, the red material is greater than 2.5%, so 2.5 to 5%. So that's very sweet material, and we need to firm up more of that, and there's plenty of scope down plunge and down dip for following that up. So where to from here? The Cairns copper deposit up in the Ararat project, it is quite sweet, rather relatively small at 1 million tons, but 2% copper and almost half a gram gold. It's a black smoker, and so the little photograph there shows a seafloor exhalative point on one of these black smokers, and generally where they exhale, they develop a thicker and higher grade sulfide mound, and it's got a very characteristic footwall alteration zone that we have yet to see in this deposit. And so there is opportunity to find this thicker and higher grade mineralization that we've yet to see at Cairns. It's 800 meters in strike. We've only drilled it down to 250 meters vertically, and the deepest hole that we've done had 6 meters at 3% copper and 0.4 grams gold. So, good depth extent potential. At Cayley, back at Cayley, the discovery hole up the top, 32 meters at 6. Just below that low angle structure, a couple of really good holes late in the program, 173 with 43 meters at 2.6% copper and 0.42 gold. And then 182, really spectacular hit, 10 meters at 4% copper and 3 grams gold. Very nice subinterval of almost 7% copper in that. Then over on the next structure, the copper lode splay at about 550 to 600 meters, we've got 6 meters at 7% copper and almost a gram gold. And then further across on that north-south structure at 850 to 900 meters depth, 18 meters at 3.6% copper and 0.3 grams gold. So the system is very, very tall, very extensive on multiple structures. So we see it as an open pit development, and then coming off that open pit to an underground and accessing 3 mineralized structures from common infrastructure. And if you imagine that the rate of vertical advance in an underground mine typically is about 50 to 60 meters per year. If we have a vertical extent of 1 kilometer, it's a 2-decade mine life. So that's what we've got in front of us. So the plan is that we would extend that high-grade mineralization just under the low-angle structure, that we would firm up some of the mineralization on the copper lode splay, bring that closer to surface, and leave that mineralization in the north-south structure, because that's probably, you're looking at plus year 10 in terms of development. So better to drill that from underground. But we have some great regional targets, and we do still have the porphyry driving this system. And so we're starting a review next week in terms of reviewing all of the data, bringing in another consultant to assess what the porphyry potential is at depth. Regionally, it's worth noting that all of the known prospects are only within a 20-kilometer window of subcrop. So the rocks come close to surface. To the south, to the east, and to the north, there's extensive cover, either basalt, younger basalt cover, or younger cover shedding off the Grampian Ranges to the north. So there's a large number of prospects within that window. There should equally be the same number of prospects undercover, and it's just a matter of how do we go after those. What we've done is we've flown a gravity gradiometer survey. It, in conjunction with this magnetic image, helps us target, and we've identified 19 targets, one of which, the Tura West target, we've identified a porphyry under 30 meters of cover. It's completely blind. Unfortunately, I think that it's too simple, probably just one phase of mineralization. You need several overprinting phases for a porphyry to become economic, but it's a technical success, if you like to call it that, but it does demonstrate that our targeting methodology is being effective. Looking at some of the other prospects, the Junction prospect is just south of the Cayley Lode, 2 kilometers south. It's the largest soil anomaly in the entire project. That's in that red circle on the figure. And the long section there shows that there have been some big hits from shallow depths at 35 meters at 3.4% copper, and the hole ended in mineralization. And that was only a shallow sort of 56 meter deep hole. So there's some real potential there, and we need to unravel that in terms of our exploration review. So the plan is to, we start to firm up that Cayley Lode at depth, that phase 2 underground high-grade material. We'll have a look at that copper lode splay, looking for the footwall feeder zone and the sulfide mound at Carroll's that could present a high-grade, thicker mineralization there. But the objective is to demonstrate that we've got that phase 1 open pit underpins the project. We've got a lot of drilling to be done, but then that we've got a 20 years underground after we've developed the project. And we want to test those regional targets to make sure that we're not leaving anything behind. So our plan at the moment, we're actually in July, and reviewing the scoping study, but just about to get back into that regional exploration and mineral resource drilling, extending the known resources and firming up what we've got into the end of this year. So a very active program from September through to December, and good news flow coming through from that. In terms of the thematic, I understand that the markets are in a bit of turmoil at the moment, but to my mind, it does not in any way knock this thematic off its axis. Really, the whole global economy is decarbonizing, and that copper is an absolutely essential component of that process, and that there is no way that supply can keep up with demand, even in this current market conditions. So the other thematic really is that there are very few high quality projects in first world jurisdictions, and that's where we find ourselves. So the summary really is that we have that first mover advantage. We've got a large tenure position. We've demonstrated the potential of the project with a high grade magma style discovery. It's a very tall system. We've only really focused on the shallow component of it. That resource has been completed. We've done a capital raising where we've got an SPP out there. Shareholders will get paperwork in the mail, also the schedule, etc. And that's capped at $1.5 million. I would encourage people to participate. Management is participating to their full extent. So if there's a vote of confidence, we're putting our hands in our pockets as well. So yeah, I would encourage people at these prices. I don't think that our share price or the valuation is a fair reflection of where we've gotten to with this project and the potential that we've got moving forward. So thank you very much for that.
Thanks very much, Chris. That was a great run through of the Stavely story. Just a reminder to everyone listening, please send in your questions. We've got a couple that have come in already, but don't hold back. Chris is happy to answer anything that you'd like to put to him. Chris, before we go to the web questions, and there's a few more coming in now, I'd just like to quickly ask you one that was emailed across to me yesterday. Given what you now know about the Cayley Lode deposit in terms of its geology, its signature, etc., what potential is there to discover other Cayley lodes? Is there potential for other shallow deposits of relatively high grade in the vicinity or further afield?
Yes, absolutely. Just prior to this webinar, the team in Victoria and ourselves had a little hookup with Scott Halley, one of our consultants. In fact, the consultant that suggested that we look for Cayley shallow. And we've just completed some regional air core and soil auger geochemistry throughout the belt. And we've got all of the assay results back. We're discussing areas where we see similarities to the Cayley Lode. We'll be putting out an exploration update in the next sort of 2 weeks or so, and we'll summarize what the team thinks is the highest priorities. But definitely we see opportunities in areas like Junction 1 that I highlighted in the presentation. Also, another prospect to the north of the Cayley Lode we call the Northern Flexure. And there are another number of other very, very interesting opportunities that are coming out with the recent geochemistry that we've done. I'll detail those in that exploration announcement in about a fortnight. But it's a case, as is always in terms of the way we go about things, is being systematic and making sure that you're highlighting your best anomalies and then going after them in a very systematic way. So there are very exciting opportunities similar to Cayley, similar positioning, similar geochemistry at surface, and potentially some suggestions that we might have some higher level porphyry indications than what we see at the Cayley Lode, and that the porphyry itself might be a bit deeper.
And just a related question, Chris, if I remember correctly, you discovered the Cayley Lode by targeting a ground EM signature. I think there was an EM plate that you were targeting, if I remember correctly. How much of the tenement package is covered by ground EM, and is that something that you're looking at as well as an exploration tool moving forward?
Yeah, we found ground EM because of I mentioned the saline groundwater in the area. Ground EM tends to be masked by the conductivity of that saline groundwater, whereas if we use a downhole tool in some of the deeper drill holes, then we get beyond that saline groundwater that's much higher in the sequence, and we tend to get a better signal, a cleaner signal from that, and so that downhole EM is looking like more of an exploration tool for us.
Okay, thanks, Chris. We've got quite a few questions coming in now, so let's get into them. The first one is from Terry Krasansky. He says, Chris, you're on the record as saying that the potential in Stavely's regional targets is huge, orders of magnitude has been stated. Do you still hold this view?
Absolutely. We haven't published the gravity gradiometer survey because we see it as such a competitive advantage for us. It was used in conjunction with the magnetics to derive the initial 19 targets. We've tested about 12 of those. I'm also on the record in saying that 80% of those targets that we've tested with air core drilling has either come up with intense alteration, quartz veining, and or sulfides. So our hit rate's about 80% success. A couple of those targets will progress to diamond drill testing, probably with a precursor phase of additional air core drilling just to firm up where the best diamond target is. So yes, my conviction is that the area has amazing opportunity. We're looking at data that no other explorer previous to us has ever seen. In addition to which, empirically, if you've got, let's call it 10 prospects within a 20-kilometer window, we've got over 95 kilometers of this belt, the rest of which is undercover and nobody's worked in those areas. So, you know, the law of probability is that there are equal number of prospects to be found undercover, and that's the majority of the extent of this belt. So there's a lot of opportunity. Yes.
Thanks, Chris. There's a follow-up question from Terry. He said, how will the potential JV impact the return for existing holders? I'm guessing is he referring to the JV with Nevada Minerals?
I think so. I think there was a previous question as well on whether we might be interested in joint venturing with one of the bigger companies looking for the porphyry at depth. So that may be part of it. So in terms of the JV with Navarre, Navarre is diluting in that Black Range joint venture, and we have been spending pretty well in that. So I'm not sure what percentage we're at now. I will check and put it out in the exploration announcement. But we're well in advance of sort of 85 or 90%, I think, on equity in that joint venture. With respect to a joint venture on the deeper porphyry opportunity, we do have confidentiality agreements with a couple of companies. They're looking at the data. We're looking at the data separately. Dr. Steve Garwin is commencing next week or the week after, looking through our data, and then he'll come to site, and it's a case of a different set of eyes and seeing what he sees. So I don't want to preempt that process, but we're very interested in trying to tease out every indication that we've got from the pretty substantial database that we've collected over the past 2 years, not just geochemistry, but also the shortwave infrared mineralogy that often gives you an indication of a vector in these systems. So there's a bit of work to be done yet, and we haven't really determined, we haven't seen the kind of offer that somebody else might make us, and we haven't really seen what we think is the real opportunity either.
Thanks, Chris. The next question is from Richard Russell. He says the resource is big enough and rich enough to develop. However, the uncertain economic times can make it hard to complete a feasibility study with certainty. What else could Stavely be doing to expedite development in terms of government and community approval for the eventual mine?
Okay, so there's a lot in that. The initial part of that question is quite right. It's a very difficult environment in which to try and nail down what you think your capital costs might be. We're seeing a lot of companies restating their capital costs in this environment. Anecdotally, I was told that if you had ordered a ball mill 4 months ago, it would have been 40% cheaper than the ball mill you order today. So some of those costs are just moving so quickly, they're very difficult to pin down. So that is a problem in terms of studying the economics of a development. What can we do in the interim whilst we're waiting for things to settle down, if you will? And we need the cost to settle down in terms of volatility, but also I think we need to see that copper price go back to what should be a sustainable level, which I think is much higher than it is now. So as we know it, we're probably looking at a copper price that we need somewhere between $6 and $7 a pound, and we can wait for the price to come to us. I'm confident that's where we'll shoot well beyond that. Having said that, what can we do in the interim? We can identify a larger project. And so really the best thing that we can do for this project in terms of its development potential is find more high-grade near-surface material, and particularly in the very vicinity of where the Cayley Lode is. So we're talking about those near mine prospects, if you will. The Northern Flexure, Junction 1 become really prime targets there. There may be one or two other targets that fall out of this exploration review that we'll detail in the announcement to come in a couple of weeks. So it's really growing the size and preferably the grade, particularly in the early years. That's a real focus for this exploration program coming up. And in terms of the approvals, we are engaged both with AMEC and the MCA with the Victorian government. We've had a number of meetings. I had meetings about 4 weeks ago with the minister and the shadow minister around their approvals process and about how it could be streamlined. And the government has undertaken to engage with those industry groups and ourselves to do that. And so I think that there's a lot of work to be done there, a lot of positive feedback, and that the government is very keen to engage. And in addition to that, we need to make sure that those policymakers, as well as the agencies, if you will, are well across what our project looks like and what we're thinking it looks like as a development. So that's a key bit of communication that we need to do over the next sort of 12 to 18 months.
Thanks, Chris. Next question here is from Dale Cameron. He says, "Hi, Chris. How do you think that bringing in another external consultant will help discover a buried porphyry system, and what would be the main task of that consultant to unravel?"
Look, I think often you are best served in this sort of exploration by having several sets of eyes look at the same problem from a different perspective. So Greg Corbett is a good friend and just a superb geologist. But Greg's strength really is holding a rock in his hand, and the rock tells him a story. And that story tells him where you are in the system. And he's very experienced, and he's seen a lot of examples. So his sense of what those rocks are telling you is very important in terms of the messaging. Steve Garwin probably works in a slightly different way. And again, having seen a lot of porphyry projects, particularly in South America and elsewhere in the world, North America as well. But probably Steve's more looking at it from looking through the geochemical database, looking at through the alteration mineralogy in 3 dimensions, and then getting on site and confirming his observations with the rocks in hand on the ground. So it's just that slightly different approach. We're doing the same thing in our own right in terms of all of that data. Scott Halley still helps us with the multi-element geochemistry and the shortwave infrared mineralogy. And we're looking for vectors in terms of the hottest part of the system. As I say, we just had a session with Scott this morning. So it's not a case of doing the same thing again. It's a case of another set of eyes with a different perspective. And I think that that diversity of backgrounds and views is really important in terms of getting a rounded sense of where your opportunity really lies.
Thanks, Chris. Couple more questions, and just a reminder to everyone, please fire in your questions while we have the benefit of having Chris here to answer them. The next one is from Colin Glover. He says that the tenement map shows Block 3 as being subject to the tender process. Is this now controlled by Stavely?
Yes, it is. I apologise if I used an old map. It has been granted as an exploration licence, and we've been actively exploring on it.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. So we don't have any more questions at this stage, but I might just, if anyone else wants to submit one, I might just put a final sort of big picture sort of question to you, Chris. You've been around in the industry for some time, and you've seen a few market cycles. For the benefit of those who, times like these can be quite unsettling, what's going on in the market. What's your take on the current situation in the commodity space? I do recall working with you at Integra probably during the GFC when things were pretty tough as well, and you brought that project into production and engineered a very good outcome for shareholders there. Perhaps if you could just give us a bit of perspective from your side, how do you see events of the last couple of months, relative to perhaps previous cycles?
Yeah, look, I think, as I mentioned earlier, we released our mineral resource estimate into the worst day in the market in 10 years. And that was, I think, an understatement, an unfortunate timing. But I think the sad outcome there is, I think that people felt that because we were being sold off, that the mineral resource wasn't good enough. Whereas, quite to the contrary, in my view, it was on the money in terms of grade, but probably a bit bigger than my personal expectations. So I thought it was a very good resource, on top of which high quality and those very large proportions of indicated resources. So and done by a third party who are probably amongst the best in terms of mineral resource estimates. So we're going to get an estimate that, if anything, if I can say so, is likely to be a tad conservative, but it's going to be achievable in terms of transitioning to a production environment, which, we've seen a couple of poor executions in the market recently, particularly in gold in WA, and shareholders have lost a lot of money. The foundation of all of these projects is the quality of the mineral resource estimate. So in relation to the GFC and in the Integra analogy, we were fully funded into a development. We had commenced construction. We built in 2009. We commissioned in 2010. But the share price got down to 8 cents, even though we were fully approved into a development. 3 years later, we've developed the project, and our next door neighbor, Silver Lake, make us a takeover offer of $426 million, 46 cents a share. So, we went pretty much 6 times that early GFC value of 8 cents when people had panicked, capitulated, and I think to a degree that's what we've seen happen to us in this very moment, is that the valuation of this asset, it's in a first world jurisdiction. It's a quality asset with a high proportion of indicated resources. It's got very good grades. It's in the right commodity. There's just no way that we can provide the amount of copper that the demand will require moving forward. The thematic is very much in place. So I think the strategy for a company in these environments, and if you will, extend it to shareholders, is that you need to get through this period in time while progressing your project, whilst balancing that without diluting the shareholders too much at these prices. So we do need to raise a little bit, which we have done. It's only a small raise, so it's minimizing the dilution, but it gives us enough to be able to do some meaningful programs and add value while we expect that the market's going to recover, and likewise the copper price, and that thematic is going to get back on track, and it'll be of interest to shareholders large and small.
Thanks, Chris. Thanks to our viewers. A couple of other questions have come in. Another one from Richard Russell. He says, how do you assess community support for the development of a mine?
Yeah, we have run a series of community engagement sessions. Most recently, when I was last over there, we held 4 community sessions in Lake Bolac, Glen Thompson, Wallora, and Ararat. And I think the messaging around, you can talk about the financials as in what we think is the financial contribution to the local community, where, and we've got this on our website in a Deloitte Access Economics report on the economic impacts for the regional area. We're talking in the order of $1.3 to $2.4 billion worth of contribution to the local community, including between 240 and 560 direct and indirect jobs. So those are big numbers, but it's kind of like quoting the Australian Bureau of Statistics numbers to people. It goes straight over their heads and their eyes glaze over. But when you start to talk to them about the number of jobs and families in the district, at Glen Thompson, the local public school is shut down, and those local kids now jump on a bus to go to Dunkeld to school. The footy team didn't have enough football players, and so they've had to amalgamate with one of the other local teams, and so they play elsewhere. It's those really personal community type of issues that really resonate with people in that district. And when they know that there are jobs, that they're highly skilled, that they're highly paid, and that will allow families to stay in the regional areas, and that means that the school can reopen and that there's going to be football players to make up a footy team. Those are the real messages that resonate with the community, and that's been our feedback. Is that, and not least of which, just the council as well is very supportive of diversifying the economy in that local area. So that's the feedback that we're getting. In every district and everywhere you'll have a diversity of opinion. People are concerned about what the environmental impacts might be, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that we have to go through so many processes and address so many issues in the various economic studies that we have to do, and we have to have baseline environmental studies for a range of factors, and we have to get X number of permits, which I think is in excess of 30 or 40 permits to be able to go into production that addresses all of those issues. So at least people have a sense that if they have an issue of concern, that it will be addressed in terms of the studies that we have to do and how we're going to mitigate those impacts.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. I think a final question here from Nicola Lazarevsky. She said, your presentation showed regional assays pending. Is it possible to list from which areas and what they are? Air core, RC, etc.
All right. We've just received the last batch of assays that we were waiting for. As mentioned in the presentation, we'll be going over to Victoria and having a strategy session with our exploration crew in Victoria on the 18th. And subject to that, they'll be providing us with a list of the priority targets. We'll compile that into an ASX announcement within the next fortnight or so and let everyone know what we think are the best opportunities in front of us and what we're going to do to chase them.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. We might wrap it up. I think we've covered all the questions, but perhaps, Chris, if you could just talk people through the SPP and the process if they wish to participate.
Sure. So all shareholders will get some paperwork in the mail. We've announced an SPP of $1.5 million. In the paperwork, it'll say that we reserve the right to take overs if it's oversubscribed. But we also have the capacity to place any undersubscription shortfall. And we have some expressions of interest from a number of institutions. So that just gives us the ability to top up. But more than anything else, I think given the prices and how I personally consider it to be undervaluing the company, it's giving existing shareholders an opportunity to participate in the raise at the same price that the institutions did. And I think that's just a matter of fairness for those people who have backed us for a long time.
Thanks very much, Chris. Look, that's been a great run through. Any final comments just to wrap things up?
No, look, I think just to reiterate, we're in the right commodity. We're in a first world jurisdiction. We've got a solid resource. It's very high quality, and it's a fantastic base from which we can develop the company further. We've got a lot of exploration opportunities. So the story hasn't changed for us. The only thing that's changed is market sentiment, in my view.
Well said. Thanks very much, Chris. Look, a great presentation. Thanks for your open, frank, and open assessment of where Stavely is up to, and a story that we're all going to be watching closely in the weeks and months ahead. So, thank you very much to everyone for joining us. A reminder that a recording will be available shortly after the conclusion of this webinar. Thank you, Chris, for joining us this morning.
Pleasure. Thank you very much, Nicholas.
And wish everyone a great day. Thank you.